Well, I would like to thank everyone for being here tonight. This is a special Gwangju Jeonnam Codesol chapter event, but it's open to all of Codesol and in fact to everyone. And it's a version of our chapter conference from last year, which got delayed due to COVID. And our theme is Play It Again, Sam, repetition, reprise, memory, time. And when we discussed this theme, I thought that Stewart Gray would be a really fantastic plenary speaker to get us to really probe some of the issues that teachers face and revisit and come back around to again and again, and maybe to get us to think about some new insights into those questions. I think Stuart is always very thoughtful and a very stimulating speaker, so I'm really looking forward to his plenary. Stuart is at Hankook University of Foreign Studies, and he has also been involved with Yongin Codesol chapter and the Reflective Practice Special Interest Group for a long time. And I'm ready for this session to start. So Stuart, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Brian. Can everyone hear me? Quick thumbs up. Very much. Right, let me just share my screen. I do believe it's this screen, but it's always worth checking. Is that visible to everyone? Good. It should say as time goes by, in case it's, just my emails or something. Is it definitely the right screen? Okay, fantastic. It's hard to check. So here we are. Thank you again to Brian for inviting me. Now, if everyone is enjoying the conference so far, you will probably know that it's quite future oriented in many ways. Our plenary speaker, our keynote speaker, was a futurist, which might be a first for our organization. But I am not a futurist and shouldn't be employed as one, frankly. So, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to talk about the past. I'm going to invite us all to revisit three issues which are not future issues, but which are issues which have been on the minds of language teachers since languages have been taught, likely since the absolute start. Um, and those three that I have in mind are these. Motivating the less motivated students is the first one, always important. Designing enjoyable activities. I don't know about you, but this topic has probably preoccupied me more than any other throughout my entire career. And the third one, the use of Korean or the L1 in the English classroom. Should we use it? Should we ban it? How is it to be used if so? Three classic issues, at least I believe that everyone will have encountered them at some point or another. So I'm going to ask you all to discuss these issues a bit. I'm also going to offer some of my own perspective. Ideally, it will be something a little bit interesting for you. Fingers crossed on that one. So the first one is, of course, motivating the less motivated students, which I shall phrase as a question: how can we motivate our less motivated students? Now, I'm going to ask Brian. Brian, can you hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Good. I'm going to ask Brian to put you all in breakout rooms just for about 4 minutes or so to discuss this very question and whatever insights you have gained in your career. How can we motivate our less motivated students? But before I do, I just want to have you consider very briefly five possibilities. What do you think about these? First, making it clear to students that they need English for their future work. How do you feel about that as a motivational strategy? Just think about it privately for a moment. Another option, rewarding good engagement in class with candy and other material rewards. What do you think about that? Third option, introducing target language culture into the class in some way in order to motivate students. How do you feel about that one? A fourth option, trying to make all your activities like games is the fourth option. What do you think about that? And then finally, option five, it is not possible to motivate students. If they are not motivated, there's nothing we can do. It's not something we can control. Again, what do you think about that? Is that true? So we've got here five possibilities. And again, the main question, how can we motivate our less motivated students? So I'm going to call on Brian now to open some breakout rooms. For about 4 minutes, I'd like you to discuss this question. Share whatever insights you have. Brian, is that okay? Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Quick thumbs up. Okay, we had a great discussion there. And can everyone see my screen again? Okay, so we had a really good discussion. I'm going to try and offer some perspective on this. It might not be groundbreaking for anyone here, but my only hope is that it, gives us something to connect with as an idea. So one way to think about motivation is in terms of a calculation. Now, a lot of literature, a lot of research these days is thinking of motivation as a kind of calculation of sorts, where essentially whatever motivates you is balanced against whatever demotivates you, and what comes out is your learning effort, basically. And so these three in particular, I want to throw a bit of shade on them, if you know what I mean. These three all have their problems, and I think we all know what they are. The first one, one problem with it is if your students are old enough to know this, then they already know it. And if it hasn't motivated them so far, telling them might not have much effect. And if they're too young to care, then, it's not going to work. So there are many issues with this, but that's the one that really resonates with me. The one in the middle, I think we've all heard what's wrong with it. There's a lot of psychological research out saying that rewards like this are short term, they suffer from diminishing returns, and they're especially weak if the students expect them. They can have the opposite effect. If students want a reward you don't give them, it can actually have the opposite effect. And the third one, believe it or not, there is research saying that if you expose students to culture, they develop a more open mind about culture. But what culture exactly are you planning to share? Is it images of people in London? I mean, particularly with English, where do you begin with culture? And then the other side of it is our students have already got Avengers movies and pop songs. If they're not learning English because of those things, it's hard to say exactly what culture we can give them that's going to make them go, oh, I need to learn English. So these things all have issues, but what I really want to talk about is that all three of them suffer from a common problem, which is they all focus on this side. They're all about just, oh, let's make the students as happy as possible. Let's make it as interesting as possible. It completely ignores the other side, which is what is not enjoyable and what's not working for them. And so I want to suggest that there is something we can do which hits both sides, the motivation and the demotivation. Just one single idea, and that is start with you. Your level of motivation is something you can affect, which will have a positive outcome for your students. And now I'm going to share something that might sound a bit tragic. A lot of research on demotivation has found that teacher factors are often the most prevalent, which is not to say that we're doing a terrible job necessarily, but when asked, many students will say the teacher's personality or style or something like that is the main demotivator. Now, that might sound like bad news, but it's actually fantastic news because it means we, the people in this room, have a huge influence. It means that we can actually make a difference. It can be a negative difference, but it doesn't have to be. There's other research that links teacher motivation to student motivation. The more motivated we are, the more motivated our students might be. And I think this is fabulous news. Um, Now, how can you be motivated if you aren't so much? There's a thousand answers to that. But one thing I do want to suggest is if you aren't enjoying your classes, there's a good chance your students won't either. So design a class that you personally would like to attend. Bring in things that you find interesting and want to talk about. There's so much more we could say about this, but I think that's a pretty good place to start. If you're not feeling so motivated, maybe start there. Begin with yourself. And what will follow may well be that your students become more engaged. So that was just something I wanted to offer. If the classes are enjoyable for you, they're more likely to be enjoyable for your students. And the second question for today, I'm going to move on now, is a related question, which is how can I make my activities as enjoyable as possible? I may have thought about this question every single time I've ever created a lesson plan. The same question comes up again and again. How can I take what I have and make it more enjoyable? And so this is our second discussion question. And again, before I ask you to discuss, there's just something I want to pitch to you. And this is based on an actual experience that I had when I was in my first ever year of teaching. And I did a CELTA for adults, but I was actually teaching children, and I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know anything. I didn't have any repertoire. So I was very dependent on the materials. And so basically, I would do the materials for 40 minutes until they ran out. And then it would be like, well, what do you want to do now? And the students always said the same thing. They wanted to do word search. So I would go to the computer, print a word search using the vocabulary, and they would do it for 5 or 10 minutes, and that would end the class. And my question is this is just for your opinion, because we're talking about enjoyable activities. Are word searches a good activity? What do you think? We may have differing opinions on this, but it's something to think about. Students want to do them, or my students did. So it's worth asking at least if this is a good activity or not. Just something to think about. Back to the main question here. How can I make my activities as enjoyable as possible? Now, I'd like to turn over to Brian there, our wonderful host for the evening, to get us back into a breakout room. And I really enjoyed talking to my previous partners, but I do recommend shuffling the groups to get alternative perspectives, if that's all right. Grace. Okay, so we had a really good discussion. It's the kind of discussion that leaves me doubting whether I have anything to add. So I hope that at the very least you can say, hey, he's talking about what I already thought, so I feel validated. That is something. I'll take that as a result. So in terms of how can I make my activities as enjoyable as possible, um, I wonder if anyone thought that I thought that word searches are bad activity. They have many issues, especially depending on how you use them. I think they can be fairly useless. However, there is something I really like about word searches. They have one thing that I think all activities could benefit from, and that is the element of challenge. Yes, and this is the general point that I want to put out there today, is that the shortest route from I have a boring activity to I have a fun activity is make it challenging. Now, there's a thousand ways to make it challenging, and I can't nearly cover them all, but there are a few basics that we all understand. Solve a puzzle or a problem, pose something for the students to solve, and then whatever they come up with, if it's a problem, if they have a solution, take it seriously. Listen carefully and say, hey, that's a good idea. Win a game. This is, I think, the most basic option of all. Make it a game, and then they have to win it. That's the challenge. Or my personal favorite, which Leonie beat me to, have them create something. Have them create something. Now, when I say create something, I actually mean anything, anything at all in your activity. If they can make something, then it's just a more challenging and engaging activity. And there's 1,000,000,000 ways to do it. If you're a teacher of kids, the most classic example of all is draw a monster and then describe it. So you're practicing he has two eyes, he has five legs, and stuff like that, right? So a lot of teachers already know that. One thing that maybe people haven't tried is getting students to make new words or false words, like to take whatever your vocabulary is and actually make new words out of it. Now, you might be thinking, that sounds difficult for my students. It's really easy. Consider Dr. Seuss. There's a walk it in my pocket, right? Making a new and funny word using vocabulary is as easy as changing one letter. Any student can attempt it. And it's even good phonics practice as well, because you have to change that letter and then vocalize it. So anything, whatever your vocabulary, whatever your grammar is, just inviting the students to make something is a really good way to make it challenging. Or if you're feeling a little dangerous, you can get them to create something in ways they're not supposed to. You can have them graffiti their textbook, for example. I love this one. You just see what they come up with. This is from a sixth grade student's textbook. Very, very hard demon face. It's interesting. And they used English. They used English to do it. I love this so much. So this is just an example, of course. But the point is that whatever you have, be it language or materials or topics, there may be some space to just make something from it. But again, creation is just one option. If you want to make a game or you want to make a puzzle or pose a problem, all of those things are good. But the biggest point of all is that there be some kind of challenge where you're saying, hey, students, can you do this? Right? I'm going to give you something here. I want to see if you can do it. That is the quickest route, in my mind, from a bog standard activity to something that will engage students. So that's what I wanted to pose for you there. Uh, Now, you might think, and it's a reasonable thought, Stewart, these ideas are all fantastic, and really all of them are fantastic, and this is an excellent presentation. You might be thinking that. But my students' English is not so great. How can I possibly get them to create anything if their English is not so great? And this leads me to my final question of the day, which is, should teachers and students use Korean in the English classroom? And I am aware that we're not all teaching in Korea, so I have expanded this to simply be L1. Whatever your student's L1 is, should we use it, and should students use it or not? And again, I'm going to ask you to discuss this, but again, before I do, I just want to prime your thinking a little bit with a couple of short stories. Now, both of these stories are true. They're true, though I have edited some details just a little bit. So, the first story related to this, when about 5 or 6 years ago, I was working at a Hagwon, a private English school in Seoul, and when I first arrived there, one of the Korean teachers came to me, and every class had a Korean teacher and a foreign teacher. And this Korean teacher said to me, Stuart, the first thing I've got to tell you is that you must not speak any Korean with the students at all. You must use no Korean. In fact, it is better if they think you can't speak Korean. And I said, okay, I understand what you're saying. But I was curious, so I asked, well, every class has a Korean teacher. Do they speak Korean to you? And she answered, they think I'm not Korean. I have told them I'm from Mongolia so that they will believe that I cannot speak Korean. And all the other Korean teachers have done this as well. And so I just want to pose a question to you now. Again, just a private moment here. Is it better for Korean students to learn English from someone who, by appearances, cannot speak Korean? Is it better if you and they can't communicate in the L1? Or if they think that? Just a private moment to consider that there. And now I have a second story, again true. This is from, actually, it appeared in a research project I did. is an interaction that I witnessed between two young children. They were Korean children, and we're talking like third or fourth grade, like 8 or 9 years old. And the topic was, "What's your favorite food?" And I observed this interaction. One student said, "What's your favorite food?" "I like ramen. You are very sick." Uh, and yeah, I was surprised to hear this. And the other student said, "Why?" And then the first student said, "Ramen has many jomirio." And that, if you don't know, means artificial ingredients. Right? And so that is, again, true story. And so the question I would like you to think about just briefly is this. As a teacher, how would you react to this? What would you do if you heard this? What is your response? Do you intervene in any way or not? Again, just a private thought there. Returning to the central question, should teachers and students use Korean in the English classroom? A difficult question in many ways. Um, if I can ask Brian for one final time to mix up the groups, put us back in there so we can hash this out.
Okay.
Okay, fantastic. We had a really good discussion there. So, should teachers and students use Korean in the English classroom? Now, I know that all the basic arguments on both sides, I'm sure everyone is already familiar with them. We should use the language, yes, but sparingly, and we should allow them to use it when they have to. But we should limit it to maximize input. Everyone understands the basic arguments, and I'm sure that you all have much more nuanced perspectives than that, even. I just want to offer mine for what it's worth, uh, because I believe the answer is yes. And I'd like to offer philosophical reasoning for it. Brian, when he invited me to do this, specifically asked me about translanguaging. And so I'd like to propose that anyone who has ever had any of the following thoughts would do well to consider how the use of L1 might actually help you. The first of these is this: I don't like stereotypical ideas my students have about other countries. There are ideas that students have about language and identity and culture and what different nationalities, the people, the languages they can speak, the languages they can't, the way they behave. Using their language is a good first step at breaking some of those down. The kind of barrier that exists between you and them. And this is not true just for foreign teachers like myself. If you're a Korean teacher, using two languages is going to show them that it's possible for them to do the same. Whereas if you're a foreign teacher, showing them you've learned their language, again, it's going to break down some barriers. There's more than one kind of stereotype. There are gender stereotypes, there are, racial stereotypes, and there are ways we can use who we are and what we know to break those down. But among the language related stereotypes, you can really take a shot at them by using their language. Another thought you might have had is, I want to show students that I respect their culture. It's kind of an obvious point, but by showing that you've learned their language, that's one side of that. But the other side is that if you exclude their language, if they aren't allowed to use it, that is also, it has its practical advantages, but one wonders how much respect that implies. Allowing them to use it is also a sign. It's like, I respect what you have to say. Again, I'm just presenting a case here. I know that there's multiple sides to this. And I'm not saying that if you disagree that you're doing anything wrong. I want to take this opportunity, if you can excuse me. Another one is, I want to connect with my students as a human being. If you've ever thought this, consider this. If you have to lie about what you know, if you have to pretend you don't know languages when you do, maybe you're a learner of a language and you feel like you have to hide that fact. That's a barrier right there between your humanity and theirs. And likewise, if you're shutting down what they're saying, you've thrown up a barrier to their expression as well. So these are things that, this is when it's time to think again. Like, should we allow a bit more language? Should we use a bit more? And another thing, I wish my students would speak out more in class, or I wish my students weren't so worried about making mistakes. And this is exactly the point I was trying to make with that story, like, what's your favorite food? If they, in my experience, if they know that they can use a bit of Korean to complete the thought, then they're more willing to express it. And if we demonstrate tolerance for that, like as long as it's mostly in English or as long as you try to use English, I, in my experience, and this is my honest belief, they're more likely to speak out. And Brian Alkema did a wonderful talk as part of this conference already, where he made this case, which I just want to repeat right now, which is we shouldn't let the language be the thing, the ideas are the thing. And if we say, look, I don't care what you think, you've got to say it in English or I'm not listening, we're we're prioritizing the language over the ideas. And we have reasons for this. And I myself am constantly encouraging my students to speak English, but I recognize that it's important to be flexible. And and this is the thing, there's going to come a point, especially with lower level students, when respecting their ideas and respecting their beliefs and their opinions, these things, respecting their humanity, there's going to come a point where that is in Korean and it's not in English. And so essentially that's my case. It's my case right there. I mean, I'm sure that everyone here is doing an excellent job, but I just want to say, I think English only policies are ridiculous and they should be abandoned. I think that they do no one any good. And I think that what we do, negotiating our use of language and negotiating with students about their use, is a very important and human process that should not be curtailed by an institutional obligation to use only English. There, I said it. So there you go. That's my opinion. I hope, even if you completely disagree, which is of course completely fine, I hope that it was at least interesting. So the three takeaways there from me, for what it's worth. If you're worried about student motivation, consider beginning with your own. If you want to make any activity more interesting, more engaging, more enjoyable, one of the easiest questions to ask is, where can I fit an element challenge into it? And to solve, frankly, a myriad of problems related to communication, rapport, identity, just for a more human pedagogy, I recommend consider using Students L1 if you are not already. So there you go. I have come here today to pitch these things to you. So I hope it was interesting. And with that, perhaps a couple of minutes over the bar, for which I apologize. I'm now done with my long rambling talk. Thank you very much.
I would like to say a really enormous thank you to Stewart for a really fresh and energetic take on some important perennial issues. So could I ask everybody to unmute if possible? And let's give Stewart a big round of applause.
Thank you.
Okay, our next